Hi, everyone. I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, I'm here with Professor Mike Moffatt from the Ivy School of Business and the Smart Prosperity Institute, and I figured we'd talk about housing because all the major parties have put out housing planks. They've all got different things in them, some of them good, some of them incoherent. And so Mike's been doing a lot of talk about housing lately, so I figured we'd check in with him. So,
Well,
Mike.
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess why don't we just kind of start with what's good about what you've seen in the housing planks that they've put forward?
Well, I think the big thing that I really like is they're recognizing that this, in its heart, is a supply side issue. That there's just too many families chasing too few homes, and that's different than 2019. We didn't see as much of that back then. So we've got different approaches. We got the NDP really focused on social housing, affordable housing with their 500,000 home promise and something in the area of 20 to 22 billion dollars that they'll throw to this in the next 10 years. So
Yeah.
that's where their supply side focus is, and they have some. They'll take the GST off of some of that construction and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Whereas the other two parties, the liberals and conservatives, have a mix of again, sort of social housing, affordable housing, which isn't their promises aren't nearly as bold as the NDP's on that, but they also have proposals around market rate housing. So not just on the lower end of the market. So the NDP or the conservatives are talking about requiring, if they're giving cities transit funding for a project. So let's say we're giving money to the city of Toronto, or let's say we're giving it to Ottawa for the LRT. Requirements that those cities actually get medium and high density housing built along those transit lines. The Liberals have this big $4 billion housing accelerator, which is designed to help municipalities modernize their systems. In some cases, literally software systems to help with approval processes, tweaking to zoning regulations, and things like that. That one, I think that of all the proposals, that one has by far the most potential, but it's also untried. Like, we've never really done anything like this in Canada. So it's one of those things that's like, it could be transformative if it works, but we don't entirely know whether or not it's going to work.
Yeah, and that's one of the promises that kind of stood out for me because what we've kind of been learning is that where a lot of the bottlenecks are happening is at the municipal level. It's approvals and it's permitting. And we just had this PBO report that's saying, well, all this money is not flowing, and then we get this report out of Vancouver which shows that it took a year for a housing project to get the permits after it was approved. So there's definitely some bottlenecking happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So Francis Bula of the Globe and Mail had a fantastic report. I think it was in May, looking at the effort of both BC government and the city of Vancouver itself to build housing. And we have this situation where the city of Vancouver is trying to build affordable housing and getting blocked by the city of Vancouver's own rules. And that's one of the big concerns I have with the NDP proposal, which is focused entirely on money. The idea is like, okay, if we put enough money in social housing, then we can get these things built. And the experience we have in Vancouver shows that no, if you put a lot of money towards this, you can fund a lot of projects, but that doesn't necessarily get shovels in the ground. Now, there may be something that's really unique to Vancouver, and maybe you wouldn't have that issue in say, Montreal. But I do think that the NDP are going to have to think about this more. That both the Liberals and Conservatives seem to be thinking about it. I think the NDP have been a little bit, I would almost say, punished by coming out with their housing plan first. That this issue has grown and grown and grown and grown since then. So because their proposal came out first, it's already looking really dated compared to the ones from the other two parties. But yeah, I absolutely agree. You can, it reminds me a lot of boil water issues on reserve and a lot of things that the federal government tries to do. The issue is more than cash, right? If the issue were simply cash, we would have solved these things. It would be done by now.
Yeah. And I guess with that in mind, the kind of promise around this will, this housing money will create jobs also kind of makes me wonder, because I look at the labor statistics once a month. The construction industry is generally running pretty hot as it is. I don't know where these jobs are going to come from. And you can't exactly just pinch out of work oil workers from Alberta and send them to Toronto and Vancouver, because then there's nowhere for them to live as they build houses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be the issue with all of these sort of plans to build more houses is at some point you run into a labor bottleneck of, okay, who's actually going to build these things? So yeah, using construction as a job creator isn't a great idea, because the sort of unemployment rates and the sort of idle labor there is pretty much zero. And there's people have to go through that whole apprenticeship process, whether or not they're going to be an electrician or a sheet metal worker like my dad was. So you can't turn these things overnight. And then on top of that, speaking of my dad, a lot of these guys are literally my dad's age. They're in their 60s and their 70s. So they're starting to retire. Many of them have during COVID. So, we're getting hit not just with the fact that we need to build so much, but we're also getting hit by this demographic side where there are a lot of people who were trained up in the 1970s when there was a big construction hiring boom. They're all retiring now. So, it's absolutely vital, I think, that we deal with regulatory bottlenecks. It's vital that, we are going to have to put more cash into things, but there is a real labor supply issue here, and that is largely provincial jurisdiction. There are some things that the federal government can do, but it's mostly it's mostly the responsibility of the provinces.
For sure. And my own brother's an electrician, and my brother-in-law is a plumber. So I kind of get this as well. And they've had, because they're in Alberta, so it's been kind of up and down in terms of when the market's building and when it's not. So I kind of can really sympathize with this notion that there's a demographic shift that's also happening within that particular labor sector as well. So we've talked about the good stuff. Let's talk about some of the incoherent things from each of the platforms.
Well, and most of I would think called incoherent, or let's just say counterproductive, I think is a better way to put it, is a lot of the stuff that was promised in 2019 and continues. And I essentially call them sort of demand side or affordability type promises, where you're basically, saying, okay, there's been these people locked out of the housing market, or in some cases the rental market. So if we just give them more money, they'll be able to afford homes. And I certainly understand the retail politics of that. Like, there are so many people who are just sick and tired of losing bidding wars. But the problem is that these things are bidding wars. So you have all of these houses where you've got 3 or 4 different families all bidding for the same house. Let's say it's 3 families. And in some cases, it's multiple dozens, but let's just say it's 3. Well, 2 of those families are going to walk away unhappy. You're going to have 1 winner, 2 losers. And if you allow all 3 of them, or even one of those 3 to place a larger bid, you don't actually change the math of 2 walking away unhappy. All you do is you might change which one wins, but the biggest thing you're changing is the amount of the winning bid. So you're just going to take this fire that we have, this raging fire of house prices, and you're going to make it worse. And all the parties, all of them are proposing things that would do that. So, the NDP are talking about 30, going back to the 30-year mortgages that we had under Harper.
Which, was all related to the 2008 financial crisis.
Well, exactly. And we have some of those things from the other parties as well, about basically like weakening macroprudential regulations or lowering insurance rates. To basically, allow people to get themselves into more trouble, financially. And you're just like, well, is that really what we want to do? So, you've got all of those regulatory sides. You have both the Liberals and NDP talking about doubling the tax credits for first-time home buyers. But this is across the board. All the parties are doing it. I'm going to assume it's good retail politics, but it's going to make the situation worse. And it's, in fact, going back the last dozen years, it's part of why we're in this problem in the first place, is going back to the Harper government, but Trudeau as well, is that we keep treating housing as a problem we can solve by allowing people to make bigger bids when trying to win homes. It's completely counterproductive.
Yeah. And kind of with that in mind, one of the other things I noticed was just in terms of kind of some of the stuff that doesn't really match up. Like the Liberals had a thing about tax credits for secondary suites, but you've got a lot of municipalities that ban those secondary suites to begin with. So there's definitely some other, kind of mismatches in there as well.
Yeah, so the Liberals have one that's a multi-generational homeowner tax credit, which I'm not entirely sure how it's worked. But the idea is that we have these situations where it's like, okay, people can't find homes, young families can't find homes, so they continue to live with their parents, but maybe they want to turn their home into a duplex. Mom and dad live upstairs or in the basement and vice versa. And you're absolutely right. It's like, okay, we're going to give a tax credit for this thing that in most jurisdictions is illegal. So it's like, okay, what is that going to accomplish? Now, I guess a sort of best case scenario is maybe with this $4 billion housing accelerator, we'll start to allow those to be legalized in certain cities. But yeah, I mean, that's the crux of the problem, that a lot of the behavior we're trying to incent is actually illegal. So it's completely working at cross purposes. And again, it's, part of it, a lot of it is due to the fact that the ones setting those rules are the municipalities, not the federal government. So the federal government and the municipalities are working somewhat at cross purposes.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other things that I just kind of wanted to touch on is when we talk about the housing crisis in Canada, we're mostly talking about Toronto and Vancouver, and Toronto and the greater surrounding area, Vancouver and its greater surrounding area. But it's really largely those two cities. And I wonder how much the focus on those two cities is kind of, I don't know if it's not working for the rest of the country in terms of the policies, or is it just that the scale of the magnitude of those two problems is so big that it's having repercussions? I know it's kind of reverberating through the GDP, but is there something else that we should be?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, because you're right. It's very uneven across the provinces, and I think we do need to divide this out between sort of pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, it was basically a Vancouver and Southern Ontario thing. So basically, it's not just, I wouldn't say it's just Toronto, but draw a circle about 200 kilometers around the CN Tower, and the part of that that's not in Lake Ontario or Lake Erie, that part was having issues, and then parts of Ottawa as well. Since the pandemic, it's grown a little bit, in part because people have been moving out of Toronto, and in many cases keeping their condos in Toronto, but they're doing a work from home thing. It's like, well, why am I going to stay here in a 600 square foot condo if everything's closed in downtown Toronto and I can't go to a Raptors game? So you got a lot of people who are moving to Northern Ontario or moving to Nova Scotia or so on. So you're starting to see some of these other markets over the last 12 months heat up. So parts of Northern Ontario, Atlantic Canada, particularly Nova Scotia, starting to heat up. But there are parts of Canada. So like if you're in Regina or Edmonton, you've got to be looking at this sort of national discourse. But like what are these people talking about?
Calgary and Edmonton, especially when they had their recession, and they had people who were basically losing money on their houses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you look, like Edmonton, it's gone up a little bit in the pandemic, but it's basically flat in nominal terms in the last 5 years. Calgary is the same. Like Regina is actually down. So yeah, there is a bit of a disconnect where we talk about this as a national issue, but real estate is it is really location. So it is isolated to Southern Ontario, BC, but we're starting to see it in Northern Ontario. starting to see it in Atlantic Canada, and actually somewhat in Montreal as well. But other parts of Quebec and the prairies, it's pretty much a non-issue.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks for walking us through this. It was great to talk, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.